Awesome. Well, thank you, Roger. It's always great to be here for these sessions. And what I'm going to do here is I'm first going to introduce the panelists, just flesh out a little bit more. They were very well, they were underselling themselves a bit, so I'm gonna flesh out a little bit more of their background here, and then we're gonna go through and have a conversation around 4 topics. And honestly, the way this is structured is we talk ahead of time about a few topics on things that have changed for us in the last 3 years as CTOs, and that forms the content for the evening. And then we'll get each of the panelists their kind of perspective on those, and we just kind of go through. I highly encourage people to feel free to put stuff in chat, questions in chat. We want this to be interactive, and honestly, we'd be happy to go out and go have this conversation, with each other without an audience. So it's fun to get to do it with an audience. But it's such a great group of folks, so I'm excited by this. So you got a brief introduction, but no particular order here. So Francesco, oh boy, Fabricino, I'm close at least, is the CTO of QuickFee. He's got over 20 years cutting edge financial, digital media, ad tech experience. He's had companies acquired by Akamai and the New York Times. And he's dealt with some really large volumes of data, like at OpenX, which is a massive ad tech company, and at QuickFee Payment Solutions, they're handling over $1 billion in annualized volume. As he mentioned, he teaches, and he's got multiple publications and patents to his name. So really excited to have you here. Patrick Gardner he's Chief Product Officer at Flashpoint, as he mentioned. He has over 25 years experience building consumer and enterprise security products. He was 20 years at Symantec, which we all know. And that's where he kind of made his bones. He grew up through the technical ranks all the way up to SVP of product and engineering, which is pretty dang impressive. He was CTO of Time by Ping. It's a machine learning startup that automates timekeeping. So it's one foray outside of security, I think. And he's an active coach of early stage startups. So Patrick, thank you for being here. And last but not least, John Shaw, who's SVP, Chief Technology Officer at Sage. If you don't know Sage, they're a leading, independent academic and professional publisher of really high quality content, very well known out in the world of publishing. He's got over 25 years total experience, and I forget, like, it's 20 plus years at Sage, if I'm not mistaken. He's responsible for engineering, technology, product management, and global publishing technology program. And he's also a frequent speaker at publishing industry events. He's a very sought after guy in that area. And one thing I'll point out, it's actually the first time this has happened. We all have degrees from universities in California. So we're all California guys from way back, covering Sonoma State, Loyola Marymount, and multiple degrees from UCLA and USC amongst us. So it's kind of fun to be here with some fellow Californians. All right, well, with that, we're going to jump into our first topic, and it's a big one. So we'll and I'm gonna do my best to keep us on track this evening, but we'll see how that goes. So the first topic is digital transformation, and big term. It's somewhat poorly defined out there, and I always kind of worry when I use that term. But on the other hand, as I was talking to John about his kind of experiences, it really brought to the forefront what digital transformation really means to us as a CTO, and it does have really big impact on us. And so, John, I'm gonna have you start us off on that topic and kind of give us a sense for what it means to you and really what it's been meaning in your role.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I know when Tony and I were talking about it, I think the word actually made him cringe at first. And it has done the same for me, but I would only say I've started to use it in some settings within our company just to help people not in technology to understand that we're going through something that's pretty massive, especially in our industry. And I found that just to be effective to help getting the conversation going and to help them realize that something is still underway and moving. I could probably talk about this for a long while, but a couple of things I think are worth noting. As I mentioned, we're publishing, and so think 10 years ago where our paradigm was print, and so to get a print product out, you worked on it. It went to a printing company, which is not us, and it was in a customer's hands, and that was done, right? So there's not much technology need except for making your computers on, infrastructure, and so forth. But our digital transformation changed the way our business operated completely overnight, or pretty much overnight. And so we now have to deliver all types of content, not books, not journals, content. We're responsible for the distribution of that, and the content's always live. It doesn't end at some point where a print product ended when it landed in your hands. And so digital transformation is kind of what we're undergoing. We didn't need sophisticated tools. We didn't need technologists. We didn't have engineers. And so some of the things I pointed out was that, like something like us having to work really closely with the business stakeholders to understand their ongoing business needs didn't really happen in the past. So for us in technology, we literally just had to give them a computer and keep the network up. And that was, an oversimplification, but essentially what was going on. But today we're, integrated into the process. We have, I was counting it up, I think we have over 35 product managers in the company. We have over 85 engineers. 5 years ago, we had 8. So that puts a context to it. And there are, things like data scientists, which we'll get into throughout the organization. Everything has fundamentally changed. Technology is a way of how we operate. So before it was just the operations of the company. Today, it's the means to our revenue and how we think and deliver. So it's just a major piece to it. So, I think that's just kind of the roundabout bit to it. Getting our business to really think that there's a transformation and making sure that the way that we're operating, thinking, setting up our structures within the departments has been key. It's not just technology, it's how the business operates. I did mention that most of those product managers are in the organization. So just getting them in, speaking different languages, making sure that technology and product understand one another and can deliver successfully. Bringing up legacy systems and bringing more sophistication to what we're trying to, or how we're operating, and the need for more strategy and governance around all of this to handle the transformation that we had. Tony, that's like a mind dump of things. We could go, much deeper into that, but I think that gets us started.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great start. I appreciate you tackling such a big topic. And so I'm hearing a couple different things as you're going through it, and I want to kind of get feedback first from Francesca. So a big part of what John's talking about is kind of a difference in the way you work with the business now. And so I'd love to get your perspective on how you see that having changed for you.
Sure. Is that for Francesca or for me? Yeah, Francesca.
Yeah, did you want to start with me, John? Or Tony?
Yes, Francesco, if you can you can talk to how it's different for you.
I mean, it's the I don't know what the noise. Sorry, the role of the CTO. I mean, it's certainly evolved. I mean, like my first CTO gig was like in the mid 2000s, and basically all we had to do was just grind out code, meet product requirements, and work with the rest of the business org. Certainly, right? I mean, we weren't pigeonholed per se, but now, over the years, it's really evolved to be a partner on the business side, right? And now, we're expected not just to obviously meet all the technical needs and requirements, and also the business and marketing and sales, and work very closely. And certainly the exposure and expectations of a CTO has grown dramatically. And I think, look, honestly, it makes sense, right? When I first joined QuickFeed, we did not have a head of product. So I basically told the CEO, I said, I'm your head of product, right? Because product is very important, and I can't gamble that, right? So Of course, we never did get ahead of product, so that made my job in life a lot more difficult. But at the end of the day, it allowed me to impact the products and services we offered in a much more deeper and substantial way. And this goes to every aspect of business: finance, marketing, sales. I meet with everyone in the executive suite and board on a regular basis, and we look at every opportunity from a technology perspective and how we can improve and how we can optimize, and in finance especially, because certainly, and we're going to talk a lot tonight about how the cloud has evolved and how cloud sprawl in particular has made managing and governance around technology research much more complicated. So we can't be so focused as we used to be. We have a much broader role, responsibility, ownership, and accountability.
Great. And Patrick, how about for you?
Yeah, I think the big change I've seen over the last few years, I've been in very high-tech companies that are building SaaS products, in the recent decade. So it's a little different than the environment most you face. But I think the biggest thing that's changed is, like, every company is digital, right? There's no business really of any size that doesn't have a digital footprint. So just like the prerequisites to run a business or be an executive, you had to understand legal to some extent, you had to understand HR, you had to understand a number of things. Technology has become that. So I think the way I view the role of a CTO now is, before, and 5 or 10 years ago, the CTO would own all the technology. So you'd get requirements from the business, you'd build out the solutions, you'd do the vendor selection, and if you tended into a CIO, you'd operate all those pieces in a mix of cloud and on-prem. Where it is today is, like, every line of business actually needs to own their own technology. So it's just become too pervasive and too big and too strategic, where actually each of these lines of business or even functions or departments need to have some say into their technology and pick the ownership and operation. And just with the proliferation of SaaS services, you no longer need an IT team to do it. If you look at just running like a technical or support function, right? My job as a CTO now is to help the support team, not to build it and operate for them, but to help them pick, like, what are the advantages of Intercom versus Zendesk versus Salesforce, and look at that. So there's just, the technology landscape has grown so big. There's so many options, and it's become so important to every business and every function to really understand technology. A lot of, I think, my role as CTO and what I see from my customers is helping them enable the business. Then there's the whole risk and compliance part, which we'll get into later. But it's really enabling and educating and guiding them to, like, understanding what they want to do digitally, and moving to take advantage of a lot of tools and capabilities that just weren't there 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I want to understand what you're saying a little more deeply, Patrick, because I was going to point out how it's a little bit unusual to have 3 CTOs, all who own product. And I believe, well, you've got the combined role, Patrick, so clearly you own product. John, you've got a bunch of product management underneath you. Francesco, you've got product underneath you. So it used to be that the adage would be, if you were delivering something that's a sort of technology-oriented service, possibly being consumed by technologists, then very common, because you understood those consumers the best, you would own product. And so, Patrick, I would expect in a security product, okay, you might own product more naturally. But in financial services and in publishing, I wouldn't necessarily have expected John, Francesco to own product. But then, Patrick, you said, well, but in different lines of business, they own products, so to speak. They own the technology. So can you help me understand, first, are you saying that you actually have distributed technology product organization, or is it still a centralized product technology organization, just you've got multiple internal clients?
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the organization. So I'll use 2 examples to illustrate this. So one would be, imagine we're running a small business that maybe is a chain of restaurants, a local chain of restaurants in LA, which can't think of one for right now that's local, but let's use that for a moment. So the general manager there is going to need to understand, and the owner of that business is going to understand what they want from technology and how to do it. So they need to have some technology awareness, and the role of the person, the CTO or the CIO there, will need to help them understand and guide them, not just to make all those technology decisions. So in that case, they kind of are the product manager piece in that role, but helping them with the technology decisions. At a larger organization or scale, so once you get to multiple lines of business or multiple departments, every department or line of business needs to understand and own their own technology. There's so much agility and so many things to take advantage of. There's no way one CTO could support multiple lines of businesses or functions. So rather than governing for them or being the police or actually being the delivery arm, you're going to get in the way. So I take it in trying to enable them and educate them what's out there, how to think about things, how to think about different trade-offs.
Okay, so at Symantec, you basically have CTOs across different business units, and yeah, okay. And John, how about you? I guess you've got product managers. It sounds embedded in your organization. Did there used to be a time when product was somewhat outside of your technology organization?
Yeah, thank you. It's actually, I think that was a good description that we just got. We have all the above. So I have product managers in what you would consider the core IT department. And those are for the kind of cross-organizational infrastructure applications that no one owned before and were highly unsuccessful at being delivered properly, but are the key to lifeblood of delivery for the organization. So our finance department and so on. So I own all of those product managers and product owners and so forth. The business, the commercial side of the business, have their own product management groups, and they need their own agility and their own specialty within their specific areas. So if they're producing for college, they're producing for K-12 education, they have specialists there that understand that area of their business. And then we're providing central technology for the most part. We also have in acquisitions, through our acquisitions, we have several other CTOs in the organization. So again, that gives the agility of the smaller organizations to have that. And then there's linkages up to me and the parent organization.
Okay. And Francesco, I want to come back to you now, but I want to actually segue into a different topic. So one of the other things John was pointing out, and in publishing, you probably had a long legacy of technology built over a very long period of time. And anything that is, legacy implies basically technical debt and things you're going to have to do to make transformations. And Francesco, can you talk a bit about how, you've seen that sort of change over time?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think everywhere I've worked, even fairly recent startups, we've pretty quickly gotten to a point that a rebuild or a major refactor, or there was a legacy system that got acquired or integrated with whatever has become like a serious risk to the business, right? And certainly, I think, with the cloud, the complexity, particularly because a lot of these legacy systems aren't necessarily cloud-based, right? And that created a lot more complexity. I worked for a casting entertainment technology startup that was doing casting technologies and moving that to the cloud after it had been, I think, 15 years running on Windows servers, on-prem, ASP Classic, not even ASP.NET. ASP Classic was a considerable undertaking to do that, right? So I think in recent years, right, as I said before, sort of this product, business, technology melting, if you will, or this combining of those three areas and the impact that and how critical that impact is on the business, coupled with these the technical debt and the legacy systems that we've acquired has become not just more critical, but a lot more complex, right? Because of the fact that, the business needs are much more stricter and the time to market is such a constraint. And I think as CTOs, we always, in some respects, I think we sort of prefer the big bang sort of or light switch style migrations, where we're going to build the new ship and then just move everyone over and shut the old one down. And I've found, time after time after time that carries with it much more risk, much less engagement. It's much more doubts from stakeholders, et cetera, and managers and other state participants that particularly with the cloud, that we have to find more novel solutions to make that migration as much more palatable to the executive team, to the board, to the customers, et cetera. And certainly with cloud sprawl and the complex technology landscape that we're in, that makes the challenge much more difficult for us.
Great. And we're going to come back to cloud sprawl I actually want to jump back to our prior topic. Duncan asked a really good question that I'm curious about, which is we talked about sort of product and where it lives. How about customer service and support? Where does that live in the organization, and who sort of kind of owns escalation, all of those kinds of things? Because we're certainly an escalation point at a minimum, but I'm curious. So Patrick, we'll start with you and then go around. Where does that kind of live for your org?
Yeah. My 80-person startup, I own that as CTO. So customer support lived there, and really it wasn't at a scale where it deserved its own department. So I had hired our first 2 technical support engineers. I set up what an L1 and L2 technical support process was, really to do it at a better cost basis and for people who had the right disposition to give a better customer experience. And then engineering was more backline. But originally it was all engineers answering everything, which had pros and cons, right? So I think I think it does need to live very close to the people building the products, especially when you're proving product market fit and viability. As you scale, and there's a lot more things that's just reading the manual or knowledge base or how-tos or walking people through common troubleshooting, that's when you start to build out a separate support organization. And then you also start bringing customer success depending on the line of your business and the nature of technical complexities, integration, and of users realizing the value. Sometimes that's easy. Like if you're in consumer, it's all about the numbers. If you're in large enterprise in a very complicated space, you do that from day 0.
Great. John, how about you?
I think Patrick just helped me understand the definition is going to be different for each of our organizations. So at first I was thinking of our customer support department that's there in line for our end users. That could be a student or a professor or a teacher. That lives in an operational department, has its own executive going up into the president. Support or technical support for technology services would fall into technology. That's primarily coming under our CIO. And then depending on the complexity of each one of our business units, and we have about 5 different core business units in the organization, not counting our subsidiaries, they have started to own some of their own customer success and customer support, again, with specialties in for the products that they run, which may either be internal people or hired organizations that are available 24/7 because we're a global organization.
Okay. Makes sense. And there's going to be escalation paths on a few of those into the engineering, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Tiered level.
Yep. Great. And Francesco, how about for you?
So we do have a separate org, and it reports up into the CEO. Interestingly, it used to report up into sales, and we kind of noticed that customer support seemed to be more focused on expanding sales and upsales rather than customer support itself. And after many discussions, we decided to change the reporting structure so that they report directly into the CEO, which I think was the best thing to do. I think what I'm challenged with now is we have a fairly small team. It's about 8 people in customer support, and engineering or the technology team is effectively 2nd-tier support. So that's an aspect that we're trying to address, and trying to make sure that customer support has all the tools and features and functionality that they need in order to be self-serve and address the needs of our users without having to rely on the engineering team to assist and help when they can't solve it themselves. That's a pretty considerable investment, and it's a topic I'd love to delve into, is all the hidden costs that we deal with as CTOs, right? There's the work that we plan for and strategize, and everybody understands the costs around that, right? Whether the costs are obvious, direct or indirect costs. But then there's all the work that we do that isn't obvious, that isn't talked about or planned or on a roadmap, that does have a cost and often can be very, very significant.
Okay, great. Appreciate it. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to our next topic, which I know is going to be another big one, and that's security, privacy, and compliance, and cloud services. Because as we were talking as a group ahead of time to prep, we realized there's kind of this interesting sort of crossover between the two. And so, Patrick, I'm going to let you kind of set that up, and I realize that kind of goes across 2 different areas, but certainly set the context for kind of the landscape of security, privacy, compliance for you, right? And of course, you happen to live in a unique position in the world of cybersecurity. But then as well, what are the implications of cloud services for you as well?
Sure. So I'm not going to answer this from my role because it is kind of specialized. I'm both building products and securing them as a CTO there. But for a CTO of any business now, you have to deal with a lot of vendors and a very large attack surface and just a state of what you manage. So, while 10 years ago, a lot of businesses would have a single colo, a single data center hosting provider, and all your enterprise applications and data and everything you supported was there. You could put a strong perimeter on it. It was much easier to secure, at least know what you had. Today, every one of you probably use at least a dozen different SaaS services. You probably have one for e-commerce. You probably have one just for your own HR systems. You have a payroll provider. And then on top of it, you have all the things that you do for whatever product development you do. So if you're lucky, you live on one cloud. But I'd make a bet that most of you probably live on multiple clouds. So you probably have some stuff in Azure, some stuff in AWS, some stuff in GCP, or some mix. Some of you may be on Oracle. So you have all those pieces. And then you have all the software as a service providers on top of that. So you probably have some DevOps tools, maybe like a Sumo Logic. You may be using some databases as services, maybe you're using MongoDB Atlas as a service. And so the net effect of this is just understanding what your applications all depend on, where they're running, what data is in there is a huge problem. So just the inventorying and cataloging problem is huge. And then you have the other problems, depending on what your line of business is. You got to know what you have, and then you have what regulation or compliance applies to all those. Where are you touching PII data for your employees? Is your line of business touching PII data? So you need high trust certifications. Do your customers want or look for like a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001 certification? So you have all those problems of just knowing where it's at, inventorying it, know what will affect what just for business continuity and resilience. And then on top of it, you have a big identity and authentication problem. How do you just manage access and identity and weave identity through? Because some of your applications, you'll need to weave all that through. So how do you not have a provisioning and deprovisioning nightmare just for your own employees, let alone for your customers? So that's the scary world we live in. And that's kind of like, as I start to think about all of the security and compliance and what our estates look like, operating technology for a business, that's what it looks like today.
That was daunting. And I want to layer on another daunting aspect of it. Francesco, talk a little bit about just the environment right now of sort of privacy and compliance as well. Security has its own, cybersecurity has its own challenges, but what about sort of, you're in financial services, right? So you've got an interesting privacy and compliance environment, right?
Yeah. No, certainly. I mean, to expand on what Patrick said, I think so well, right? Dealing with just the sheer number of services. I remember like the only cloud service we used, I remember the days when the only cloud service we used was like Amazon, and that was it, right? We got our Amazon bill and we could look it over and make decisions, and life was easy. Now everything is SaaS, right? The HRS system is SaaS, right? Governance, IT governance systems are SaaS. Like there's this huge explosion. And you couple that with, rogue IT and, how users are, anyone can sign up for any service, right? And this whole model, particularly with younger team members, is I need a diagramming tool for work. Let me go sign up right now for some online service, right? I think the other day we had one of the sales team members was using a online PDF converter, right, which is a haven for hackers and cyber extortionists. And I was like, oh my God, please stop. Do not use those online free services, right? You never know when this stuff ends, right? So I think as was mentioned, the attack vector are numerous, right? And data leakage, whether it's intentional or not, is much more harder and broader than ever before. And then you couple that with the whole, remote, on-prem, hybrid working environments and all that comes with that. It is very difficult to secure someone's home who is not tech savvy, right? And I remember when the stay-at-home orders went down in Los Angeles, at least in March, I think of, 2020, all of a sudden I was getting calls from people who were saying, I don't know what to, CEOs and other senior management people at companies were calling me saying, what do I do? We don't do anything from home. People go home and they stop working, and they literally were lugging their desktop PCs home. They didn't have VPN, they didn't have anything, right? And I think we know what all the tools are and how we have to use them, but the complexity of everything is much harder, right? BYOB, try running a business organization where you don't allow people to use their own personal devices for at least email, right? If not chat, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever, right? It's become much more complicated. And then you have the compliance aspects, right? I've done, ISO and PCI and HIPAA, and when you're purely in the cloud, you can't just pass along the compliance documents from the cloud providers, right? It's not that simple, right? You have to have a broader, holistic compliance strategy than just we use a bunch of compliance services, right? It's not transitive, so to speak, right? So those complexities, again, much broader and much more difficult. And as I think was a very interesting discussion in the LA CTO forum was around, what level of compliance should you have, and how do you manage an organization when they have differing levels of compliance? So it's definitely become a lot more complicated, and maintaining that compliance is also in and of itself, right? The old days of just the annual PCI questionnaire they're pretty much over.
I'm gonna come back to that cloud topic because I think I've got a sort of different take on what you said on the cloud. But John, I want to ask you kind of the same question around sort of compliance, privacy. How's that impacting you, and what you're needing to do from a sort of security standpoint?
Yeah, listening to these two guys, I don't think I'm going to add anything that I haven't covered. My God, made my head twirl a little bit. But from some things that we're seeing, just getting back into the SOC 2 and ISO 20001 PCI, these are not things that we actually had to deal with about 3 years ago. It is, with our landscape changing, these are new challenges that came up. And we're having to overcome pretty quickly. And everyone knows that's dealt with these. They don't happen quickly. There's nothing fast about getting SOC compliant or ISO 20001 compliant. And so that's been a big hurdle for us. Understanding it, having to try to sell in products where we're not compliant yet. And boy, we tried passing the reports on from our cloud providers. Didn't work. You're right, Francesco. But boy, it was fun to try. So found out quickly it wasn't going to work. So what we found quickly though is we didn't have the staff to understand it. We didn't have the software and tooling to deal with it. We didn't have the time to get there. And so that was a challenge. And of course, the costs of doing this, of course, also looking at the cost of not doing any of it, which could be catastrophic for the organization. So we've had to put in a lot of new systems, a lot of new process, bring in a lot of new people, have a lot of consultants working with us, and wading through it as we're engaging with this new environment. I'd say decisions around our spend and staffing levels on these issues have been challenging, trying to get the business to understand what the needs are. So they know that we're not selling. Salespeople know we're not selling the products because of something, but the costs that have come with it and the cost of not doing it, and trying to explain to the rest of the business leaders why we need to spend has also been a challenge. Going back to the digital transformation, that's a component of it. The last thing I was thinking about when we were just talking about all of this is just safety and what constitutes as a breach, and that's been a real interesting topic within the company of just trying to understand where our data is, who's accessing it, and what level of breach is something that we have to be cognizant of and report to. I'll just state again, from us being in education, we're dealing with selling products to K-12 teachers, students, and educational providers. So we have to be really compliant with what we're doing.
Yeah, and so I want to kind of segue into the technology side of this, and we got actually some really good questions as well. But I'm still in the mode of trying as much as possible to hide behind my cloud services providers. Patrick's shaking his head no. So, I mean, certainly, I think there's actually some big advantages if you can isolate certain kinds of data in ways, right? But Patrick, okay, tell me all the reasons I'm wrong.
Well, it depends on your business, right? So, and if you're selling into a regulated space. So one big thing that, just to reinforce the point, as CTOs, we've all had to become compliance experts and understand regulation and frameworks. So like keeping up with CCPA, GDPR, and some of these things have criminal liability. I'm not trying to scare anyone, right? But like the legislation is going further and further. I'm not passing judgment whether it's a good or bad thing, but that's been a huge part of our jobs that we've all had to become experts on, whether you wanted to or not. So I think cloud providers do a lot. I think what you all need to be aware of and really think about is all these SaaS and cloud providers are not an abdication of responsibility, but they do a lot of things because that is their business. So are you going to do a better job securing your physical data centers in AWS? No way. They offer all the certifications for it. All the things that anyone will ask you around physical security, you can say check and point them at Amazon. So it's not hiding behind them. It's using them for, to use the Amazon term, undifferentiated heavy lifting. They're going to do that really well. You're automatically going to get a trust check. Now, does that mean your authentication to your application is going to be good? Maybe. You may use an Amazon service to do that, but you may have messed up the implementation or something else. So I think it's more about getting back to the shared responsibility model. What is the cloud provider offering? Use that collateral. I use it heavily, so I don't hide behind it. I didn't like that connotation, but I leverage it for what they do and what I'm paying them for. But there are parts that we build on top of it, and you got to know what those are and be very clear on what the cloud is not solving for you, and be transparent with your customers.
Yeah, and I like your terminology better than hiding behind them. I wouldn't say that in a typical assessment. But
Tony, if I may just add something onto it, I should say when we're thinking about like SOC 2 compliance, we are doing exactly what Patrick said, but we're also keeping the scope of what we need to do very narrow for what we need, because
exactly.
It could explode, and I don't need for the whole organization to be SOC 2 tomorrow. And so to meet the needs of what we're trying to do, we really look at exactly what is it that needs to be compliant and keep it there and focused. Same with PCI and so on and so forth. So I think that's really important to know.
Yeah, and so that is what I'm sort of talking about, where you try to keep the sort of the attack vectors down to singular environments. However, so Eric Hammond pointed out that they're cataloging, documenting all the tools and third-party services they're using, et cetera, and they're up to 600, right? And so even collecting all of those and trying to figure out, so how do you sort of manage the chaos of all of these services, and are you guys doing anything with tooling that prevents leakage out of, so you've tried to isolate in particular environments, can you prevent leakage? Do you use tooling around it? So I just would be curious what you guys are kind of doing out around cataloging and as well preventing leakage.
I can say we are, but we're in infancy stages. So cataloging was a big piece, just understanding our environment and risk, documenting ownership, connectivity of the applications, understanding their environments that they're in, and so forth. But we're in very early stages, so I'm not going to say that we're far out there. We're learning on the fly here.
Patrick, I saw you're unmuted.
Sorry, I'm a passionate security person. I think the way I think about this is, what do we control today for enterprise? We don't fully control the networks. Everyone's working from home and not always on a VPN. We don't control the devices. We talked about people bringing their own devices, and we don't fully control the data center or the applications they're going to use, right? So you've got to I mean, this is where you have to lean into education, and people have to be responsible. You can't, you can guide them the right way. You can help educate them. You can help get feedback loops when they're going into a yellow zone. So I love Francesco's example, like someone's going to sign up for Lucid Charts and put crown jewels there. We can't stop that. I mean, we can try, but people are going to find the ways around it. Just do work on a device. So gone are the days when we can put up a perimeter and make everyone safe inside the fort. So there's a big element of this where, make sure your core IP assets have friction and inertia, so it's not easy for someone to exfiltrate them or ransomware to get in there. You have to do those things. But you really got to think about the employee experience and how you guide them onto like, hey, these are things that should not leave this environment. And then you could put up some, some bumps in the road, but like it's really their responsibility and it's that accountability that I think everyone has to have.
That's interesting to hear a person who's lived his whole life in security tooling saying that. So so that actually I'm gonna feel better tonight for at least a little while. Francesco, how about you? Any comments on tooling you're using?
Yeah, I think I cannot stress enough. I totally agree with Patrick on that. The ownership and accountability aspect, especially when it comes to security, right? That is in my opinion, the most important subtle thing that we can do for securing our technology, right? And I stress this: everyone is responsible for their security. And I know that sounds a little bit like you'll get fired if you screw up. No, it just means that we have to understand the security. Like what we do when we give someone, whether it's an access token or a password or whatever, we say you are responsible for securing this, right? You have to maintain, the security of it. You have to set the two-factor, right? Don't try to avoid, don't set the password to football or whatever, right? Like that goes without saying. I think the one thing I will say, like, gone are the days, where we just had to worry about our firewall. Man, that feels like a lifetime ago, where we just had to make sure we had the right firewall in place that was updated and all that other stuff. Nowadays it's much more, I always say that the cloud makes technology more accessible, right, to everyone, including hackers, right? So, the point I'm trying to make is that we rely a lot on tooling, and making sure that we're constantly analyzing all of our cloud infrastructure. And some of these tools are relatively inexpensive and some of them aren't, and unfortunately I haven't found a good open source tool for this, but tooling around ensuring that we have all the proper permissions in place, whether it's, our S3 buckets or, whether it's Azure or Google Cloud Compute Platform. But that is, I think, a big factor in it. But if I would say probably the number two most important thing I do in securing an organization is I ensure that we have the right partitioning of access, right? I cannot say every startup I've worked at where every developer had access to production was the most risque, if you will, with respect to security, right? You're starting a company from scratch. First thing you do is you minimize access, right? Always limit, right? What is it? The principle of sorry, I'm blanking on the name. Principle of least access.
Least privilege. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, that you've got to live from that from day one, right? And obviously you need some redundancy around that access. You can't have one person, obviously, but I think those two aspects, creating a culture of responsibility for and ownership and accountability for security, and then ensuring that the principle of least privilege is in place across the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there was a question on sort of access control and, I'm sure identity management coupled with that. And so I found that to be a constant challenge for me. And they were asking kind of like what tooling are people using around, sort of access control. And I personally have found that to be a struggle, especially as things proliferate. And the last thing anybody wants to hear is, that's going to be hard to get integrated with whatever we're using for identity and access control. But I guess you guys found better ways of handling that than I may know about. Don't unmute all at the same time. Okay, moving on. So it's a pain for everybody, basically. Patrick, did you have a last thought on it?
I mean, I think we can be helpful as a group just by saying like what we use. I mean, I think it is a pain point because it's just a complex problem, right? But like what we use at my current company works okay. I'll go that far. We use a combination of Okta and Google with SSO and SAML Federation. It is a lot to administer, but usually gives us most of the capabilities we need to. And then for our application, I've had good luck using middleware like Auth0 in the past of building that, and then you can federate in all your end customers' identity providers. Like the more you can get out of not managing your customers, individual identities, the better. So those are like some things. I'm sure that's pretty standard, but like I think it'd be helpful if we mention what we use for each of our gigs.
Yeah, thank you. John, Francesco?
We are Active Directory and Auth0, Okta, one company now. So in the midst of trying to deploy that across the organization.
Yeah, I've used many of the same tools. I mean, I'm a huge fan of rolling out SSO. You know, it annoys me to no end that usually you have to pay a premium to get a SaaS service on SSO. I think that's something that needs to change, because you know most companies, especially early stage startups where resources are tight, will avoid using SSO versions of SaaS software just because of the usually you have to pay the enterprise level or the highest level cost to get SSO. So I've done everything from the Google using Google or SAML and Microsoft Exchange, etc. One thing I want to say about like security tools in particular is that I find that because of the changing landscape, I've just found that tools that work well don't always continue to work well. And the shifting and changing cloud services landscape plays a big part of it, right? I always look first at the cloud service providers and see what tools that they have and make sure that we're making the most out of those native tools, because those will usually give you the base cases. So you don't end up with like, MySQL with the default password or something like that, egregious sort of issues or data leakage.
Yeah, I was actually the last presentation, I think at the LA CTO forum, we had somebody from AWS going through some of the new services that they're rolling out. They're probably not new. They were new to me, but my God, do they have a ton of security products out there, from validating that you have set up environments according to your policies, looking for leakage of data. It was just a whole bunch that I was unaware of, and we ran out of time. We couldn't even get through all of the tooling that they've got. So it was very interesting to see that, because I knew about, tooling that represented the kind of problems we were just talking about, but it's really interesting to see that. Now, of course, that all assumes you are, able to wall into AWS, and that's your singular environment, which I think is the problem. Is that for a lot of us, stuff just naturally needs to end up living elsewhere, or at least that's what the business says. All right, we're going to keep moving on here. Obviously, based on the chat, there's a lot of interest in that one, in the last topic. I think, well, I'll be interested to see if we've got good answers on this, but talent is still, probably one of the number one issues that as CTOs we still face. Now, what's interesting is where many of us are in remote organizations hiring, a remote US, remote across the world, and have all sorts of different kinds of, solutions. So the world has certainly changed in the last 3 years relative to talent. But Francesco, I'm going to let you kind of start off and talk to us a little bit about how things have changed, what you've seen change over the last 3 years.
Oh, I'll go further back and be brief, but so I first became a hiring manager in 1998, and it was tough then. I mean, this was before the dot-com boom and the subsequent bust, and it has always been hard to find talent. But I will say that this is arguably the worst talent market that I've certainly ever seen, right? And the struggles, it's probably talent, hiring, retention is probably like the most popular topic in the LA CTO forum. It just comes up over and over and over again, right? So, I wish I had something novel to say about it other than all your different sourcing and retention channels are just vital and critical, right? Like, I'm a big fan of, conferences and, hackathons and outreach and working with universities, particularly the younger talent, because I think that always has pretty interesting implications in the long term for for building out engineering teams over a much longer period of time, right? So it's, tackling internship programs, recruiters, love them or hate them, they're a necessary evil, right? If you're fortunate enough to have the resources to build out your own internal recruiting team, that's great if you could use retained as opposed to
Contingent.
what is it? Contingent, sorry, contingency-based recruiting, that's always better, in my experience. So you really have to look at every single possible channel for you building your sourcing candidates and maintaining that sourcing channel. And I think, someone told me a long time, always be recruiting, right? Doesn't matter if you have a position available, but just always keep networking and meeting people and exploring different aspects of how to find the talent that you need. Now you've got the last few years, right? Thanks to coronavirus and how that's changed the landscape, right? Now all of a sudden we have much broader talent pools to work with. I mean, we in a Quick Feed work with talent all over the world, right? And we've gone fully remote, which in some respects makes things more, gives us more opportunities, but at the same time it also complicates things. Given I have European team members where you've got a short window in the morning and you've got to really focus on them first thing in the morning, otherwise they've gone to bed and that's the end of that, right? So the complexities of the hybrid teams and what that means, right? And that also brings negatives with it. I mean, we've all heard about this, quiet quitting and, people having multiple jobs at the same time, how you engage with people. So now we take it back to retention, and honestly, I think retention is what is going to your best tool, if you will, addressing the quiet quitting, addressing the multiple jobs, and how you engage with your employees. So, I wish I had some magic formula for this, but I don't think you win because you do a number of things, a myriad of things correctly, not because you did one thing right. You lose because you do a few things wrong.
Okay, that's well said. Patrick, how about for you? What's your kind of experience around talent these days?
Yeah. I agree with Francesco. It's hard and many faceted. So I think I've been fortunate enough to work for very mission oriented and driven companies. It hasn't been just a job for anyone. And that's meant the teams I've worked on, I've been fortunate enough to have 5 to 10% lower attrition rate. So I think giving people a reason to wake up in the morning and do their work and job is really important. And I think this has even gotten more important in a remote world, but every team has to have some affinity to each other and own their own success or failure. I think if you start changing resources around on projects and treat them as a resource pool, there'll be less of a tribe and less to hold them together. So I've been pretty lucky because of the mission orientation and being able to really consciously set up teams. And now I look at time zones versus cities. Before I looked at cities, but making sure people have that affinity and that band of makers or brothers and sisters making things together, that's really huge. And then the other part I'll add in there is I always think about what's core IP and what's the work that we want to do and don't want to do. So I'll give you a specific example. In my last company, ML machine learning was a core thing. We could have went and hired consultants or outsourced it, but that was really a core competency and we wanted to invest and build that. We had huge problems with MongoDB. Never used transactions in MongoDB. It's horrible. But we didn't know that. We were learning. We hired a lot of MongoDB experts because there was this point in time where we needed an infusion of skill sets. And I didn't want to hire a MongoDB expert because if I would have hired and found that person, they would have been gone in a year because the problem would have been solved and the business needs moved on. So I always intersect my technology strategy and roadmap with where the business is going and what that's going to need from a people side, and then source it that way. Is it a short-term need? Is it a longer-term need? I think if you set up those things to have sustaining teams that own their own success, working with technology they want, and they're tied to the mission, you tend to do better in it. But there's a lot of spaces where that doesn't need to be internal and you need to use external. So that mix, I think, also helps to think about.
When you talk external, Patrick, can you define what that looks like a little bit more for me?
Yeah. So either using vendors, consultants, or outsourcing or offshoring. So all of those is what I mean by external. So
you're using all of those models. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And John, how about for you?
Yeah, I'll just start by saying we use all the same models Patrick just defined, and really trying to figure out, as Patrick said, the best way to utilize the resources. I think that's really important. Value add, as Patrick also said, is really important. Get the right work, focus your internal teams on projects that are going to really keep them motivated. We at Sage are a mission-oriented company that's based in education and focused on social justice. And so our technology team are coming with that slant already in there, and that makes a little better for us with retention. I have not had much of a problem to date on retention issues through the COVID years. In fact, we feel like we've really been able to pick off some really good people that have left their companies because they didn't like some policies or were asked to go back into the office or wanted more of a mission-oriented company that was stable. So we've been fortunate. I just say the time to bring on staff has been significant. So we might find really good, talented people, but the timelines to do it are way beyond what we can accept. And so that's been a real challenge because our staffing has blown up as far as our needs, as I was explaining earlier. So we do have to try to figure out, are we hiring? Where are we hiring? When are we using contract? When are we using, companies that are literally just basically outsourcing the project to them? So it's finding the right mixes. When we do time zone, this is a retention thing too. We found that we used to not really do time zones well. And so we were putting teams that were, across 14 different time zones, making their lives very challenging and not very fun. So we've started reorienting our teams to make sure they're within a time zone ratio that works for them to get maximization of the time they have together, which allows us to build the teams and for them to build the camaraderie and feel more successful in what they're able to do. So that's been a huge bit of our success as well. So I've had luxury of saying, look, India's not perfect for everything. So let's build our teams that are India and UK together because they have a good crossover. Let's use Colombia and the Americas for our North American teams that need to be localized through. So we're really being thoughtful about how we're putting together teams.
And do you find though you can get sort of equitable skills to marry up in each of the sort of time zone friendly geographies?
Yes, we've been very successful doing it.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I guess well, there's a couple questions that have come up, but one of them has to do with sort of mentoring in this new remote world, and so I guess I'd love to hear. Actually, you're all of you are remote to some degree, right? Patrick, do you have some? No. So okay. Do any of you have offices anymore?
We do, and there's discussion of what they're for, but yes,
okay.
They're around.
Okay, so I'm in the same boat. Francesco, do you guys are full remote?
Yeah, we do have one like a WeWork-ish space. It's not WeWork though.
Okay.
And we kind of go back and forth about whether we need to keep it or not. I personally wish we can because it's nice to be able to meet when necessary, but it is a cost.
Okay, and then Patrick, you're remote?
Yeah. My last CEO really wanted people to come in the office, but it was hilarious. One person took a picture one day where 5 of us were in and we were all in the little phone booth all day. And my wife was like, what are you doing? Like, yeah. So like, I agree with what Francesco was saying. Like, it's nice to have a place to meet and everyone's so hungry for that human contact. So that exists and is real, but they want to do it on their choice to have that human contact and a focus on deep things, problem solving, not execution. So I found it very valuable to have spaces available so teams and cohorts can meet up, but it's not really hybrid, it's remote work, but meeting spaces available. That's kind of where I've seen things settle for my companies that I've been at.
I've actually struggled with the in-person because you almost never end up with a team anymore where there's not at least a few people that are, someplace else, right? And so, yeah, you can pull some people together, but there's going to be some remote folks. And then pretty soon you're all on your laptops in the conference room. And then you realize it's actually more effective to be on the individual things. So you just sit in your office in the facility. Luckily, there's lots of empty offices. to do those.
Tony, that's exactly what I was going to jump in and say that same thing. That's our issue with being in Thousand Oaks, California. No team that works together are actually based there. We are going through a little bit of an issue. We have a big London office, and the London management team really believes in building culture and being around one another, which everyone does.
Yep.
But they're starting to change their stance and saying we want people back in the office. I've been a strong voice to say that the people that we have in technology came to us because they don't want to be in an office, and they're really trying to get their jobs done. And although we want them to be together here and there, if they are asked to be back in the office all the time, there's no justification for that full time. So we kind of have this issue that's about to come up, at least in one of our offices.
So then talk to me about how you've tried. Well, you talked about culture, talk about mentoring, but it's like, and especially for engineers, what do you need to do to still have a successful, well-performing organization? If things change from a management standpoint, and John, maybe we'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been building this big engineering team since COVID, interestingly enough, and so we're kind of building our practices. We're trying to find the right balance of how to keep in touch, how to have build that team and the team spirit, but not take away from the value that they're trying to add, and knowing that their personality types are typically introverted. So we're trying to find the right balances of in-person team meetings, which might be once a year. We're carving out policies for them that are a little different than they are for the rest of the technology group, saying, we know your value add. We know engineering is what we hired you to do. We want you to focus. That's really important to them. I want focus. I don't want to sit in 10 meetings a day. So we're really trying to carve out different rules that seem to keep up our team spirit and for that group. And each group is a little different, right? Your Scrum teams, some of the other members might want high contact, and so we're trying to figure out what each team needs.
Okay, great. Patrick, how about you?
It's been a struggle. I think it'd be interesting to read like a sociologist's analysis of what engineering has changed, but everything's moved to Slack, right? So what's happened is everything's gone to either structured time or through Slack. And so there's no such thing as walking down the hallway and looking over a senior engineer's shoulder, asking him a quick 2-minute question. You have to interrupt someone's flow. You have to go into it. So I'm not sure we've solved it, but I've seen people take the self-learners are fine because they kind of figure it out and they'll be a bull in a china closet. The collaborative, more introverted learners, which like John said, a lot of engineers are, it's harder. And I have noticed over the last few years, their growth rates are slower because they don't have that person-to-person collaboration. So I think it's been a big challenge for me, honestly. I'm not sure I can tell you a bunch of things I tried. I'm not sure any of them have worked greatly.
Well, give us a couple that you at least are positive on.
Yeah. One has been our architectural review process. So having everyone actually design and architect a piece of software and present it, and it's both to govern, but reinforce and build them up. So taking those learning forums as a team has been one piece. The other has been the change process or the code commit process. Those again are an opportunity for collaboration. It's a little forced, but you have to bring in a culture of collaboration, not just governance for it. But that's a great learning journey and interaction on reinforcing your coding styles. Like you have manual steps in deployment. Can we put this in infrastructure as code? So like those types of things create it, but they're more mechanical and less organic, I find. And so they work, but the intent of them has to change from just like making sure people don't do bad things to actually being more of a teacher and a partner through those gates.
Great. Francesco, how about you?
Yeah, this is a great topic. So one of my favorite words is cultural debt. And cultural debt, if you're not aware, basically refers to all of the improvements that we need to make to the way an organization works. It's like technical debt, but the soft skills, right? The soft parts of an organization. And I love the term because it's the vocabulary of what is become a lot more difficult given remote and hybrid teams. I mean, we've lost that ability to just basically see each other and read body language and understand, like you could be having a hard time and you're basically isolated. I mean, I don't see people crying on Zoom meetings too often, right? So how do you know, right, your coworkers are struggling, or your reports are struggling, or their reports are struggling, has become much more difficult. So the engagement that I talked about earlier with respect to retention has become a lot more critical. I used to be able to say 9 times out of 10, I knew someone was going to resign. Nowadays, it's like 2 times out of 10, because I just don't have that ability to really like get a feel for people. And I care about the teams I work with, right? So it's not just the company goals, but the individual goals as well. And I found that teams that are the most productive are ones where, we have a good time doing the work we're doing, and we're supportive of each other, and we're honest with each other, right? And it's a lot harder to do that remotely than it was when we were, in person, or at least grouped, if you will, right? In terms of like different locations. So that engagement and like what Patrick said, oh my gosh, everything's a freaking Zoom meeting, everything's an appointment, right? I have 15 to 20 calendar entries a day. Even simple conversation is an interruption, right? Or a huddle or whatever, right? So I think that addressing those cultural debt has been very difficult. We've tried different things, like we had like our use of Slack is out of control, so we've tried to say to people, look, if it's urgent, use Slack. If it's not urgent, use email, right? And allowing people to have sort of like that balance. But I honestly think people just love being able to Slack. And I think it's I made a joke to our T lead the other day that we should just convert to using Twitter, and then just give everyone that whatever bullhorn to be able to say whatever they want. I was just I was joking, right? But it's a tough problem, because there's so much of that instantaneous conversation, and it's much more difficult actually to understand sometimes when you have to read an entire chain of short messages to really understand what's going on. When I fall behind Slack, it's very difficult for me to catch up.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I will also point out what Bill Perducci said about really easy in Slack for people to get a negative reaction to things in certain cases that was not intended that way, that wouldn't happen like with a live conversation. And so things can be rough. One thing, Patrick, you were kind of like talking about organic interactions. Right now, I've been a big believer in sort of, I don't know, forcing structured interactions, just because otherwise they sort of don't happen. And so I've, instituted things myself personally so that I can try to stay in touch with people better, but it consumes a lot of time now. And I do that with all of the engineering management to force things. And you definitely have to lean into, yes, we're going to spend more time getting on Zoom discussions, but engineers need a topic. You can't just get them on a Zoom discussion to have a discussion, right? Or let's come on and, let's try to do this fun thing together. It's going to die out quickly. One thing somebody said, in-person gets-togethers once a year. John, was that you? Yeah, I did the same thing. Actually, a couple of companies I'm with. One of them we did it's Playa del Carmen outside of Cancun, because it's Latin American developers. It's the US product and engineering team got together there. We did it such that, it made it really easy to bring your significant other, which makes it, because it's a few days of work and then you get the weekend for fun. And I've also found it's a fantastic thing from a recruiting tool standpoint. And also boy, does that make you look good to your significant other standpoint. So that one was really great. I wouldn't claim from a content perspective, we did some, planning exercises, etc. But wow, does it gel a team. So I really, it was expensive. And actually the biggest expense was we all caught COVID. And so we came back, and everybody was basically out for 3 days, 5 days. It was that was kind of miserable, unplanned downtime, but I still would do it.
Tony, we talk about the expense to those things, and what we've started to make sure everyone understands is it's far more expensive to re-recruit people that leave because we didn't do it. Very, very costly. So the expense is really nothing when you think about it, as you just said, recruiting tool.
Yep. Great. Okay, I'm going to move on to our last topic here, just in the interest of time. And that's around, well, I'll call it the data explosion. And basically that we have all of these sources of data, well, both first party and third party sources of data. And so we can amass these massive amounts of data, and then we figure out, well, how we're going to manage all of that stuff and what we're going to do with it. And so, Patrick, I'm going to have you sort of talk about, how you've seen this change. Well, what's happening from a data perspective, but also particularly what that means for you in a CTO role, to sort of deal with it, because I think there's sort of a different dynamic that CTOs face relative to this particular area. So can you tee that one up for us?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that's changed over the last 3 to 5 years is every marketing department in the world runs off data now, right? So like the standard marketing playbook now includes searching, buying AdWords, doing SEO. So everyone has customer data and telemetry, if you're in technology, both from your own product and services, as well as third-party data that you'll buy. So we've moved into, very targeted, very data-driven and analytics of marketing and running the business. So that's a huge thing that's changed as a CTO. And, a lot of companies have data scientists or data analysts in the marketing department, in the finance department, outside of just the technology organization. So that's a huge change. The other big thing that's changed on data is we generate so much data in so many different places, particularly with microservices architectures. You're encouraging our engineers to use a different data store for everything, right? So now you have data spread out all over. So you may have some things in a relational database. You may have some things in whatever bucket system you're using, S3 if you're on Amazon. And the data in it's going to change. Some's going to be actually the application data. Some's going to be your logs. You don't know what's in the application logs. So like just similar to the service sprawl and the attack surface in a state that we manage, data is a similar manifestation of it. But it's also like critical to running a lot of functions in the business, particularly like marketing and finance are the two that come up. So I think for me as a CTO, like what I really try to think about is like, what is the data needs and what is marketing going to need to do, right? They need to understand the targeting, the ROI, measure the campaigns in a very analytic way. How do I help and enable those pieces? And then from the product side, just understanding, again, I'm a security guy, I'm going to go back to the regulation compliance. I want to know what data is where, because more and more of the more security conscious industries are waking up to like these application logs that, maybe in Sumo Logic or in your cloud platform, they contain sensitive information to some extent. And so trying to understand that, not just where your actual application's writing in the relational database or the transactional database, has been a big change. So just data discovery and classification is the big change that's come up for me in the last few years.
Okay. John, how does that compare to sort of what you guys are seeing around, data explosion, so to speak?
Yeah, we definitely, a lot of that resonated, Patrick. So I'd say in our space, the issue probably is a little bit more on the side of everyone wants data, everyone needs data. No one has a common definition of what data means, which is a real problem when they say we need more data scientists, or we need more solutions for our data, but they can't actually define to us what they mean by that. And they don't have specialists in the organization or product people that can kind of fill the divide between technology and the management to say, okay, here's specifically what we're trying to get from this data. So data literacy across the organization is a massive problem, and definitely at the very top, even a bigger issue. So we haven't really conquered that one yet, I would say. But we have data scientists. With that said, we have data scientists that are living in the business. We have a data and BI team that's very busy and has millions of dollars of requests for next year, even though they don't know what it is they're going to do or why they're hiring the people. They have lots of requests for something. And so I'd say costs, data explosion, how much data we're taking in, expectations of what we do with it. how we process it, speed at which we process, where we process it, all those are becoming issues. And then of course, storage costs. We're doing all this mostly localized too within our data center. And so we've not even converted up into cloud environments. But of course, we have people in the organization that just want to spin up an environment and start doing something, which then gets to the security issue. Sorry, it's a big mind blow there of what's going on.
That's great. There's a couple things you said that I'm going to come back to, but Francesco, talk to me about kind of your top level experience, and then there's a couple of areas I want to drill down on.
Sure. Yeah, definitely on the pipeline, right? Because, as was mentioned before, we have so many different sources of data and there's so much data to be collected, right? And you've got to secure it, you've got to ensure compliance, good luck with a delete request, right, for GDPR, right? You got to really be able to hunt down all that data and deal with it accordingly, right? As appropriate, right? So that data pipeline, I can't stress it enough, right? Companies who ignore building out the data pipeline earlier find themselves really struggling to get, whether it's a data warehouse or a data lake, up to where they need to be able to provide all the analysis and BI and data science that they want to be able to have. I mean, this is, from my data science hat perspective, is the biggest challenge that companies face that don't do it early, right? They end up struggling with not just being able to analyze the data, but to secure it, to ensure compliance, and so on and so forth, right? The cost factor, I think, is also something pretty significant. I mean, when I was at OpenX, we had $1 million a month bill from Amazon, right? We could afford it, but that was a huge amount of services, global. The other aspect, I've had $25,000 a month bills for Redshift, right? So it's really easy to fall into that hole. But if you're like me, I prefer more data rather than less data, right? So I tend to start with more data and then try to trim it down as needed from a cost perspective. So you have to manage your different, your primary, secondary, tertiary data stores accordingly, and ensure you have the right retention policies around it, and you don't have any data leakage, and that you can provide the data in the formats needed for analysis.
Great. So I want to go back to something. Apologies, I think it was John who said it, but no, actually, Patrick, you were talking about the data literacy. John echoed it. I literally had a conversation today with a CEO who was talking about reports that he wanted to assess repeat customers. Tried to drill down with him for 30 minutes. He really clearly didn't know what he really wanted. And there's risk in our data that we would be able to pull that together because it wasn't really one of the things we were looking at. Maybe we could approximate it, but oh my God, such a brutal conversation. And this is happening, once a week with different business owners, business unit owners. And so you said, hey, we're going to try to increase data literacy. How the hell are you doing that? Because I am struggling mightily.
I have an evil way I do it, so
Okay.
Don't attribute this to me. But everyone knows how to use Excel.
You are being recorded, just so you know.
Yeah, I know. Everyone knows how to use Excel, and basically, what I try to do in a nice way is tell someone, show me an Excel pivot table or some Excel, just with some Excel macros, what you're trying to do. Here's the raw data that we have. So I give them a sample of what we have, and I do clean it and massage it a little bit, but like, here's the raw materials. Where are you trying to get to? Can we do that together as a whiteboard exercise in Excel? Because before you build out a whole analytics platform and pipeline and ingest the data and all these other things you need to deal with, do we even know what we want and if they thought it through enough? Because you get a lot, like we as CTOs, we get a lot of good ideas, but not thought through on if it's even possible or if there's even a path from A to B. So I bring people into Excel and we workshop it through, and then we can talk about scaling that to terabytes of data and dealing with other issues. So that's kind of like a technique I use that's works 70% of the time.
And so literally I was, talking about things in Excel terms with the CEO and describing the data. So he wasn't looking at it. So maybe that's the problem, but it became really clear that he didn't know what he wanted out of the data set that I'm describing. So I guess how do you, well, you must have to reorient them or something,
Well,
right?
let me give you an example that
Okay.
was recent that might work. I was working with someone in finance, and we were talking about bundled sales revenue allocation.
Okay.
If we sell 5 things, how do we attribute value to it and do that? And the fundamental problem that we had to uncover was we couldn't use a straight add up the list price of all the constituent parts and get a good answer on how we do bundled revenue allocation. So like by working through that with an Excel sheet in front of you, you could start to see it, because like the naive answer is like, well, just add up the list price and divide it. Like, okay, do you actually want to attribute 40% to product A, 20 to B? Like, no, that's completely wrong. Okay. Now we can talk about it. So like it's a data modeling exercise, fundamentally, a tabletop data modeling exercise using a tool that everyone knows. And then you can kind of help them understand, like, there's fundamental data gathering problems, or there's business judgment needs to come in. Sometimes there's different problems, right? But this one was like fundamentally there's a business judgment where like you couldn't just use simple math.
Okay. John, how about you? How are you promoting data
Yeah,
literacy?
I would say I made it sound out really awful, and then you said it's recorded, so I'm going to make up for it. But all seriously, I should say our finance department actually is in pretty good shape. We have finance business partners that have been hired in, which are really good at understanding the financial data that we have and are able to model it out really nicely. We have a couple data analysts that have now been hired on that do speak data and do understand what they want. They are a little rogue, but we're trying to be better business partners with them. So our data and BI team is partnered with them to understand what they're trying to do and help them in ways they can. And then our data and BI team are acting more as product managers and kind of doing what Patrick said, meeting with their business stakeholders, listening to them, talking it through, spending lots of time trying to model things out, hand things over to them, saying, is this what you're looking for? Try to provide tools like Power BI so they can do a little bit more with their data, give them more access into the databases and so forth, anything that's safe. So there's a lot of work being done. I just say we're not as sophisticated or far along as we probably should be or need to be in the coming years.
Okay. And I guess for me, this also then harkens to the really frustrating conversations I've had around machine learning, data science, and I don't know, what magazine articles exactly the CEOs are reading, but they think that, like glorious insights without necessarily, things you're trying to show or prove up front will magically emerge, right? Hey, can't we just get somebody to, apply machine learning? So Francesco, I think you teach in this area even. Do you have any advice for me on how I can better manage that conversation with executives to explain what machine learning sort of is and isn't?
Wow. Look, I try the best way I do it is I use sort of like more like obvious examples, like facial recognition. I think people can grasp the concept of, right? We all meet people throughout our lives. We all get, we see someone, we've met them before and we're like, wait a minute, I remember this person, right? Showing them is always better. And this goes back to, by the way, the example you were giving before about like looking at this data set with the I think you said it was the CEO, right? Like what I would do is I would create different explorations of the data and try to get them a sense of it. I mean, when I've done this with tools like Tableau and other BI tools, like you can see like how their eyes would light up and see, okay, this is a way for us to explore this data in a way that may not be always possible, right? And look, I mean, obviously those are going to be individuals that may not be as familiar with what these capabilities are, but just in my experience, you put it in terms that they can understand, show them, use stuff that's tangible as opposed to something more complex. Like financial machine learning might be a little harder to grasp for the average person who may not understand machine learning, even if they're well versed in finance.
Yeah. So really great point about having people looking at the actual data. I think I underestimate the value of that. I guess I'd be curious. So I've also struggled a little bit with where data science should live in the organization. And actually, I can't remember, Patrick, John, you guys mentioned something about that, but I'm curious how you found that, like where that should belong in the org. Have you guys landed on a model that you think works?
We've not solidified that. Let's just say it lives in multiple places right now,
Okay.
but with no decision on it, that being the right place. It just lives in multiple places.
Okay. Patrick?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of organizations, none that work great. And what gets called a data scientist between different orgs is wildly different. One org can't process anything other than SQL queries, and they can't even touch a JSON file. Others are talking about supervised versus unsupervised and machine learning. So high variance. I think the thing I will say, and I put this in the chat, you need to pair any data scientist or data analyst, and what your titles are, with a data platform, and whether you build your own or use one, because like I think a lot of people hire data analytics or data scientists without thinking through the data prep and the data platform pieces. You don't have to build your own, you don't have to hire a full data engineering team, but you have to have a platform, otherwise it's just not gonna be effective.
Okay. Francesco?
Okay, I didn't know how to raise my hand there for a moment. So this is one that, look, I've struggled with for a long time. Here's my sort of perspective on it, okay? The more mature your data pipeline, your data platforms, your reporting tools are, the more data science and related can live on the business side, right? If you're still building out your data pipelines, if you're still figuring out your BI tools and reports and all that stuff, then it needs to be in the engineering side. And let me tell you, when I've done it the opposite way, it's been very hellacious, right? If you're a mature organization, data science lives in engineering, then you're just pummeled all day with, can you change this report? Can we need this other version? Can you tweak this? Can you tweak that, right? If you don't have that mature pipeline and it lives in the business side, then it's like your data science teams are floundering, right? They're just treading water and they're not getting anywhere, right? Because they don't have that infrastructure in place, if you will, to support their work and to be able to just be driven by business, right, without looking back, so to speak. So again, every environment's unique and every environment has their own challenges. But in my experience, that's been a pretty good heuristic, if you will, for trying to figure out where it should live.
That's helpful. Bill Parducci made a very strong statement when I was asking where should it live, and he said not product. And I can't tell whether he was joking or whether he was serious.
I'm dead serious. And the reason for it, and I totally get what Francesco's saying, but the reason I said it because what we were finding is that product people generally look at the data science people, and in our case, also the research people, which are totally separate groups, and said, we need you to go show that this is true. And waste tons and tons of time, or worse, they're working with somebody at the upper level who've decided that we need to go out and prove that this thing is real and that we can do it, et cetera. So we need you guys to come back and do the things with the numbers so it makes the thing that we have, so we didn't lie at the last thing we promised. Where we had a lot of success where it was is when you, which was an earlier point, is the data science team goes out and they look at stuff and they go, this is interesting, look what we found, this is interesting, and you always start with some sort of thing that you can point at and say, what do you guys think about this? And then we can throw it away or expand on it, go deeper. But when the business, who in my experience doesn't have experience with hard data science and with hard deep research, particularly things like semantic analysis and stuff like that, they don't know when they're asking for something that's not possible. And they may do it emphatically and with a lot of pain on all points as you go through it. So that's why I'm just not a fan of it being over on that side.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really fun too when you go through some like machine learning exercise and you realize it just seems like noise and you're not able to actually derive anything out of it. And then you go back and hopefully you haven't spent a lot of money at that point on it. But
exactly.
But
and worse, the CEO sees one data point and latches onto it, and the whole concept of N of one is toxic. N of one is toxic is completely lost. I want more of these and less of those other ones that don't make sense to me.
Yep. All right, well, guys, that was great. I really, we went through a lot of different topics today. Really interesting conversation. I've latched on to about 3 or 4 really good practical takeaways. The most recent one, but I've actually took some notes along the way, but most recent one was just making sure that the data is in front of the CEO during that conversation. That's probably, I don't know why I am not doing that. So, so hopefully everybody else got some very interesting sort of practical advice, and even just positioning how I talk about leveraging cloud services. It's fun. Somebody's joining the meeting right now. So, so you know, the cloud services and where they fit in the security realm, the talent, remote work, data explosion, and certainly we're sort of living in a new world because of digital transformation. Our businesses are all heavily leveraging technology. Even an old school publishing firm, is a technology firm now. So it's really kind of a remarkable time, and hence the reason why it's still the worst talent market ever since 1998. Every year it's still the worst talent market. So I appreciate all the questions and stuff. Patrick, John, Francesco, thank you so much, guys. This is really great. And Roger, as always, appreciate the invite. This is the 10th year we've done this, but probably we've done 6 of them in those 10 years. And every time it's a great conversation. So I really appreciate the invite every year.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for pulling us together.
Yeah, outstanding meeting tonight. We appreciate it. There's such good conversation that I think we're going to post not only the video but also the audio of the meeting. I think.
Yeah, I really
I'd like to
appreciated
listen.
how
I like to listen
how
to
you wove in
all right.
audience questions into the discussion. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the last topic. It's my area of expertise, so I enjoyed that very much.
All right, Tony, thanks, and panelists, thanks very much for taking your time and sharing so profusely. I was quite surprised to discover that security is a focus for each of you. So as a follow-on, next month we're having a security and privacy panel discussion. So those of you in the audience who are interested in what the panelists had to say tonight may be interested next month as well. And then in December, we're going to have a strategic planning meeting to kind of brainstorm on how we can provide more valuable services to the IT community in 2023. So again, thank you everyone for joining tonight, and we'll be sending out a questionnaire, a very short questionnaire to each of you for immediate feedback. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
So,
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.